This is Matt Brown, and you're listening to Just a Good Conversation. The old saying, don't meet your heroes, as they often fail to fulfill your expectations, resulting in disappointment. For 2 hours, I got to meet one of the photographers I looked up to when I was starting out, Greg Gorman, and he didn't disappoint for 1 second. A true master of the photography craft. If you find yourself lucky enough to take one of his workshops, you are going to walk away a better photographer.
Yeah, well, I mean, I avoided digital for years because I always thought it was a good excuse for poor photography. And I also felt that in the early days, the digital cameras didn't have enough megapixels to be able to make a print. 3 megapixel cameras didn't really work. I used all the little point and shoot cameras, but I didn't think that the regular 35s had enough oomph.
I'm Matt Brown, host of Just a Good Conversation. Take a listen to my archives. My guests have ranged from Oscar winners, college coaches, and head of psychology at Cal State Dominguez Hills, Dr. Tiffany Herbert.
Some people are depressed, but how would you, what makes it depression versus sadness? I also believe that saying I'm depressed is sort of external, like it happened to you, where saying I'm sad is a more vulnerable statement to make. So I think there's some distance in being able to say the label versus the feeling.
The rest of my conversation with Dr. Herbert can be found on our archives at justagoodconversation.com. Let's take a quick break for a sponsor before diving into my conversation with Greg Gorman. I have the pleasure to sit down with, I'm going to say, one of my idols, one of my photographic idols. Greg, how are you this morning?
Well, that makes me feel pretty good, so I guess I'm doing well.
I mean, I'm going to be very serious. You were one of the guys I looked up to when I wanted to make images.
Well, that makes me feel good.
I wish I lived, though, in a time where it was easy to see your work. Growing up in the 80s, you had to go to a bookstore or a library, to find your work. And a lot of the stuff where you were doing music or movie posters, they didn't have your name on it. So
right, a lot of the work that I produce commercially never show your name.
It's
so
unknown.
People go, oh, I didn't know you did that.
Yeah, you would think did he do this? Did he do that? Now I can see everything you've done and how you've done it, and that's been fabulous. I think for the younger photographers coming up is seeing how the masters did it.
Well, it's interesting today because a lot of the millennials that are running the show today have no clue. Most of them have not done their homework. Most of them don't know who you are. Most of them don't respect your style. It's pretty much the reason that I kind of got out of the business around 2006.
See, now that breaks my heart.
2006, 2007. Well, it got to the point that I would get projects, and I don't want to sound bitter about it. It's really probably the reason I decided I had been there and done that. That they lack respect, and I mean respect in the form of understanding who you are as an artist. I mean, I would get to the point where I would be on a photo shoot with talent that had hired me to do the pictures, and the art director would say, I would like you to light her from this side. And they go, well, I don't think she's going to look great from this side. Well, that's what we want. And I said, not a problem. You're the boss. Just let her know because she knows I know how to light her. And they would say to me, well, you're the photographer. You tell her. I said, it's not going to happen. So
right.
That's when I decided to kind of check out.
Now, your original background was at Kansas as a photojournalist. Were you gonna be a newspaper guy?
Absolutely not. I actually borrowed a friend's camera. We were joking about this before we started the podcast to shoot a Jimi Hendrix concert in Kansas City. It was a buddy of mine that I went hunting and fishing with on the weekends, and he was an avid photographer. And I thought, well, gosh, I've got third row centers tickets to see Jimi Hendrix. I might as well take some pictures. And with that, I borrowed his camera, shot the pictures, processed the film in his darkroom the next morning. And when I saw pictures coming up on a white sheet of paper, I was pretty well hooked.
The magic.
And so I was already in arts and crafts, basically. I was in liberal arts and sciences at the University of Kansas. And I thought, well, I'll enroll in a photography course because this is pretty cool. And the only course that they had, honestly, was, unfortunately, was photojournalism. But it was okay.
Okay.
And so that was my undergraduate major at KU.
So then what made you, other than, obviously your destination was SC, but was it come out west, young man, kind of?
Yeah, honestly, my destination wasn't really SC. I was going to school there. And I'd met a friend, a guy that became a dear friend of mine to this day, Larry Stevenson, who was working for Eastman Kodak, and he had seen some of my work in a local show, and he let me go to his house and print in the evenings and on a color enlarger and everything.
Whoa.
In addition to my work at KU. And he said to me, you know, Greg, unless you want to become a technical sales rep, there's no reason for you to go to further with even he said like Brooks or something like that.
Right.
But you're better off to basically study film. And that's why I came out to California to go to film school at USC.
Now, and you've admitted this, and I thought it was kind of funny that you're a control freak.
Absolutely.
Right. But you went to SC for film, but it didn't blend. You just couldn't get your vision across.
Well, what you said is true. I mean, exactly that. I mean, they basically, in a movie situation, they'll always go for a great acting take over a great camera take.
Right.
And I like that one-on-one control. I like working with an individual in the studio on a one-on-one situation without a lot of flack standing around telling me what to do or how to operate.
I mean, you look like you should be a Ridley Scott cousin. I mean, you've got that look. I don't know. He's a control freak. Cameron's a control freak.
Well, Tony Ridley's brother is a good friend of mine.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I could see you actually trying to do that. I mean, your visuals are so what they need now in Hollywood. I would have loved to have seen you behind the camera.
Yeah, it's funny. It's the whole style has changed. I mean, today, you know, when you look at a lot of the work out there today, which a lot of it's really fantastic, but it's different. And, you know, I mean, I had my own style, which is, you know, strong highlights and harsh shadows. And today's stuff is a little bit more editorial. A lot of it's a little bit more open, less, I would say, planned out, a little bit more just very editorial looking. I mean, even the portraits that you see coming out of actors. And today, of course, a lot of celebrities don't even use portrait photographers anymore because everything's just on Instagram. They just do their own selfies.
Yeah, your deep shadows would scare the industry today. Huh. I mean, they would just be like, we can't see anything. That's okay. It falls
right,
in
I was
that
never
zone.
about the Kodak moment, you know, I was more about, you know, using the shadows and the blacks to frame the face.
And tell a story. I think that's lost, that those shadows, the curves, the contrast give something to the image. And now it's, you know, every shadow's opened up. Every highlight is smooth. There's nothing there.
Yeah, they like a lot of fill.
A lot of fill. When you're at SC and you're starting to see like, okay, this isn't going to be my cup of tea. I'm not going to go cinema. Were you panicky? Were you nervous? Or was there a path that you were pretty sure you were going to go?
No, because I felt pretty comfortable. I mean, I was still, I'm in the department that I dealt with the most at USC was as a cinematographer, because that's where my passion was. So I still was involved in doing all my lighting, and in the films that I made when I was at USC, I still used my hard lighting, and you still see it in those old movies. And I just realized that I was a real people person, and I like to not have so many people around me when I'm working. So on a movie set, it gets to be a little cluttered. Yes. But ironically, you know, my career in terms of my commercial work really was shooting motion picture campaigns. So I was on the set. But generally, when that happened, I had my own one-on-one time with the talent in between their acting takes or when they were changing a set or whatever.
Who was your influence when you were coming up? Who did you look at?
As a young guy, I really loved, of course, Richard Avedon. Helmut Newton was a big inspiration in many ways, even though our styles were really different. But Helmut and I became very good friends in life. Helmut and June and I became very close friends. And I always loved his work and the intensity in his portraiture. And, of course, I loved Richard Avedon. I loved Irving Penn. I loved some of the early Scribula, Scribnesky. I mean, you know, I never was really a fashion photographer. I mean, you know, I loved Hero's work. I loved Guy Bourdin's work. You know, I loved a lot of the stuff that Bruce Weber did. You know, I loved Giampaolo Barbieri, who's become a good friend actually since. So I admired their work, but I always was much more on the celebrity-driven end rather than fashion. Right. And I don't know why, but that's just kind of where my life took me.
Yeah, the avenue just kind of opened up and you went for it. Yeah. Right? Because would you say Interview, the magazine, was your gateway in?
Certainly. Interview magazine and LA Iworks were the two, I would say, biggest influences in terms of getting my work out there for people to see. Certainly Interview.
Interview
was
first?
the beginning. Yes, Interview was the beginning, and that's an interesting story.
Yeah, how did that even come about?
I was working on a picture called Grease 2 with Alan Carr, and the lead actor was a young guy named Maxwell Caulfield, who this day I credit for helping launch my career in many ways. He was starring in this movie, and he had just come off Broadway in a little play called Entertaining Mr. Sloan, and he was kind of New York and Hollywood's bad boy. He was this beautiful boy that had the lead in Alan Carr's movie, and Interview magazine was keen on getting him for the cover of the magazine. I had the access. This is one of those situations where you're in the right place at the right time. And they contacted me and said, could I get him to shoot a cover for Interview magazine? I said, I don't know. I really don't know, because it was new to me. And I said, I'll ask him and see what he says. And he said, yeah, sure. We had a great relationship. And I see Maxwell and Juliet all the time, still to this day. They're just a beautiful couple. And I went up to Max's house, and we shot around the pool and got some great pictures. And that was really what helped launch my career, was certainly Andy Warhol's Interview magazine. And I shot probably, I don't know, 15 covers for him, something like that.
Access.
Maybe a few more than that. And they were great in those days. It's kind of where you started with our conversation. Or actually, I think before you started the podcast, you were saying how things had changed so much. In the old days, you'd get time with the talent. And
right.
Today, you're lucky to get 15 minutes. We can do a story on that later about Tom Waits, if you remember.
Yes, yeah.
But the movie thing was pretty extraordinary, because Interview, very much unlike today, would say, Greg, we want Kim Basinger for this cover. We want you to shoot it, or whoever. Mm-hmm. And here's her number. Call her, call the publicist, and do the shoot. Nobody came to the shoot. I would go research a home that I'd want to shoot in, rent a house, and the talent would meet there. I'd book my hair and makeup, my stylist. We'd bring the clothes, and the only people there was the talent and my makeup, hair, and styling people, and my assistants. And we had full creative control. I would turn the pictures in that I wanted to have run, and there was nobody editing pictures. There was nobody saying you can use this picture, you can't use this picture. And I think it's one of the reasons that Interview was so successful in those early days and had so many great artists working for them, because you really saw the footprint of the talent as opposed to the footprint of some idiot that's trying to figure out what they're supposed to do as their job.
Right. I mean, they hired you for your skills, your talent, your access, your ability to have a moment with the subject. And there wasn't an art director or creative director jumping in going, oh, no, Greg, we got an idea.
Never.
Oh.
And I really virtually would turn in, if it was a six or eight pictures, which however many setups I did, I'd turn in one picture for each of the setups. And the only choices that they got were the headshot for the cover of the magazine, which we usually would shoot on a clean back sweep. And then Richard Bernstein would do his stunning portraiture interpretation of the photograph. And there I'd give Richard 4 or 5 pictures to go from.
Wow.
But they never one time ever came back to me and said, do you have another picture on this setup, Greg? Do you have something else we might look at? Not one time in all the years.
I mean, you were young at the time, but did you realize how good you had it even in that moment?
No, I mean, I think my career I was just so fortunate and very lucky about being in the right place at the right time that everything just happened so fast. You really didn't have the time to really assess anything. You just kept going from one to the next, and there was no break.
Wow. I mean, just saying how that worked out never will happen again. Never. It's done. You literally were working in a golden age of ability to communicate with your subject that's completely lost now, with layers of people in between. Jesus.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. It ceases to be fun,
Right? Yeah. I mean, you were literally, and I've heard like you're cooking lunches and you've got a great set and you're sitting down, you're communicating, you're having a wonderful event with this person. Now it's like, hi, how are you doing? I got 5 minutes. Here's my setup. Bang, bang, bang. Done. That's it. Doesn't matter.
It's pretty much what it is. You really don't even have time to get into that person's head to figure out what you're supposed to be doing or what you're capable of capturing, because everything is moving at such a rocket pace. And it's just how it is today. I mean, in the day when I did it, we were flying first class. We had suites at the Ritz-Carlton. People were generous, and everything was and in return you gave 110%,
right,
because everything was pretty terrific, and it's so changed. I remember taking the Concorde to Africa to shoot a movie poster for a small movie for Disney Pictures. So it just goes to show you that today, you know, they want to fly. You know, I'm 6'3" and 73 years old. They want to fly you coach. They want to do. I don't do it anymore. You know, it's just not worth it.
Hey, Greg, can you get on Southwest?
Yeah, I don't mind short flights, but and coach if it's. But you know, when you're 6'3" and you're flying, you know, across country or you know on a long flight, it's tough, especially if you're going to get off the plane and go right to the set and start working, which has happened many times when you finish a job here and then you had to be on a plane to get to New York to shoot something the next morning or that night. You never knew, you know, it was crazy.
Right. Was Interview where you kind of started to get your style?
Oh, no question. I had a very good guy that worked with me in the early days named David Jacobson, who now owns a couple of very popular bars in Bangkok, and who's a good friend to this day, who honestly helped teach me my early lighting. He actually, as my assistant, knew lighting much better than I did when I was first starting out, and I have to take my hat off and give the kudos to David, but he showed me the importance and the critical use of spot grid lighting. And then I got completely hooked, obviously, and I liked, you know, working with that much shadow. Not what you said in the highlights, but what you don't say in the shadows that kind of sometimes can make a difference in a picture. And David certainly was responsible for showing me that back in the 70s.
Wow. Because I know you like to start off, you know, camera direct, and then you start to manipulate the light and find what works on your subject.
Right. Well, I'll normally start when I'm working with someone if I'm unfamiliar with them, unless I'm just dead locked in with a very over-the-camera light. And I'll have them turn into the light and away from the light and look at, you know, what I want to play up in the highlights and play down in the shadows. And then I'll move the light to where I want it to be.
Yeah. When you're looking at a subject, before you even bring a camera up, I mean, you're really just dissecting their whole body, cheekbones, hairline, jaw, the whole thing, trying to see what is going to work for them. Is that what you're...
Oh, yes. And I usually start, like once the person comes in, and they'll go into hair and makeup. We'll usually figure out the clothes is the first thing we do for the shoot. And then once they go into hair and makeup, I'll have had a discussion. And I always work with my same makeup and hair people so that they understand what goes into creating a Greg Gorman photograph. It's not Greg Gorman just doesn't create a photograph. It's my team are all just as critical members of that image that you see on the printed page as I am, because they understand who I am and what I'm looking for. And they're able to do their interpretation of what they think I want, so to speak.
Right.
So when they start, it's kind of a convoluted answer to your question, but so when we start with the makeup and hair, I usually will sit down in the makeup room, and I'll be watching them while we're having a conversation where I'm trying to come up or down to their level to kind of get us on the same page. Mm-hmm. And I'll kind of watch everything in the makeup mirror and see, you know, if the nose bend this way, is this eye smaller? I need the camera a little higher. Is there something I need to worry about? And that's kind of how I'll start it. And then the assistants set everything up based upon what I want, and then I'll go in when we start and obviously fine-tune everything.
Now, you've said this a lot. Team. You really, really value your team.
Yes.
Your hair, your makeup. You've been very loyal to them for a long time. Yeah. You've had a lot of
my first two main assistants. I mean, David was with me for some of the most fundamental years, the very, very beginning. And then my other assistants, Kevin Lynch was with me for probably 25 years, and Richie probably 20. So, yeah.
That's long.
A long time, yeah. Well, you know, they understand you. They also know when to speak and when not to speak. And that's a big thing with a lot of assistants. You know, they're there to not really be seen. And this sounds bad on my part, and I don't mean it in that way at all. But they're really kind of in the background, and they're really there just to kind of fine-tune what your needs are while you're shooting. And to find people that can anticipate your next move and be ahead of the game, that's what you want to find. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're the best support, and that's what you want all the time in a good team player. When you were starting out, was it 35, your tool, and then did you go to medium format? Yeah, well, I started out for a little bit for 35, but I was on to a Hasselblad by the time I was on to Interview Magazine. So okay. I was probably shooting 35 in the mid-70s, and when I started getting into more creative stuff, and of course certainly the motion picture stuff, I got into medium format. I think the first time that I shot a medium format camera is a funny story. I had a little apartment in Laurel Canyon, and I got I don't remember how the hell the job came up, but I got an assignment to shoot an album cover for Leon Russell. It was called The Wedding Album, Leon and Mary Russell. And they wanted it shot in, medium format. And so I borrowed my friend's Hasselblad, and I have setting everything up in my little apartment in Laurel Canyon. And Leon says to me, he says, so you have a Polaroid? And I said, no, what do I want a Polaroid for? I didn't even know that it was a Polaroid back for a Hasselblad back in those days. I'll show you how naive I was. But shortly after that, I think probably within the next month or two, I liked that big square format. I bought a Hasselblad and switched to pretty much shooting medium format.
Especially for someone who's doing portraits. I mean, that just lends it.
And I love the square format. I love them.
It was great.
Yeah.
When did then the one sheets come into your life? Was that after LA Magazine or LA Eyewear?
No, LA Eyeworks came in around the time of Interview Magazine.
Okay.
Pretty much. That's another story. The one sheets, I started doing some freelance work where I was just working free. I got an agent, I think towards the end of the late 70s, and I was working with Sigma and Gamma and all those things. And I was just doing, spec work on Richard Corman movies, just low budget features, but some of them ended up becoming movie posters. And so I somehow through friends started doing a little bit of that. And then in the early 80s, I was fortunate enough to get some really great movie assignments like Big Chill, Scarface, Tootsie. It was one of the very first.
Now that was before unionized, right? Was that you?
I never was union. Right. I was always known. My position on a movie was always as a special photographer. The word special is what was used when they would bring in a non-union artist to shoot.
Okay.
And what they would have to do is they would have to hire a union guy to sit on the sidelines. And I mean, God bless him. I had Phil Stern sitting on the sidelines while I was shooting.
Did you really?
Yeah. Yeah. Which was just amazing, And, and my stupidity, I didn't really know who he was then. And we were friends, and we'd talk, and we'd have lunch together, but didn't know much about him. And he was a very humble guy, never really said a lot about what he was doing. And
yeah, you kind of ruined Tootsie for me because in the scene you're in with Dustin Hoffman, all I wanted to do was see what camera you were using.
Yeah, I was shooting a 503 or 501 or whatever. And that was a funny story. I came in one day from lunch. I'd been working on Tootsie for about 5 weeks, and I walked into the loft.
Now, what are you doing for 5 weeks?
Shooting Dustin, shooting Jessica Lange, shooting everything, shooting all this special photography. They kept me on. He had several other photographers on the movie before me, and it didn't work out for him. And he and I got along great.
Right.
And so
5 weeks is a long time.
Oh, I ended up doing 6 weeks.
And
it was funny. And it was funny. So I came in one day from lunch, and Sidney Pollack was nervous because, that movie was such a landmark film.
Huge.
He thought, he didn't know if he was going to have a hit or a bomb because it was such a crazy movie. And I came in, and Sidney says, "Oh, my God, Greg, how long have you been on this picture?" I said, "Well, this is my 5th week." Sidney says, "Oh, my God, Christ, I cannot authorize you to stay on longer than this." I said, "Okay, I'll let Dustin know." And so I went to see Dustin, and I said to Dustin, "Listen, Dustin, Sidney said, this has got to be my last week." "Fuck, Sidney," he says. "You stay on." So we worked, and Dustin was great, but Dustin was promised a scene in the movie that he could do whatever he wanted, become famous. And he told Sidney that he wanted to do a shoot with me. And that's how that shoot came about in the movie, because Dustin asked, he wanted to do a scene where we did a photo session. And then...
And thank God it was you, because you've seen this. When it's photographers in a movie who aren't photographers, it's horrible to look at. They don't know what the hell they're doing. Their dark slide is in. They're not sure. The lights are all backwards. Yeah. But
we actually did a real shoot. I mean, it was a real shoot that they filmed.
You could tell.
And Dustin said to me that beforehand, he says, "Greg, who do you know that's famous that could come down and be in the movie with us?" And so I thought, well, I'm shooting David Bowie this weekend, so I'll call him and see if he'll come down and do it. And I called David, and David said, "Well, I can't because I'm getting my highlights done for our shoot."
Diva.
It was one of the shoots. No, he was never a diva. David was so far from a diva, but it was true, and because he had done his hair kind of blonde for our shoot that time. So that was really a true story. But I called Andy Warhol up at the factory because we were shooting right there by his office off Union Square, and Andy came down and was in the movie because of me.
Right, and it's
which is a true story. And then he wrote later in his diary that I cheated him out of his day rate, which is kind of funny. I didn't know that until Pat Hackett. I heard from Pat Hackett that that's what he had said.
He wanted his money. Well, it's interesting how something like that, a relationship evolves, where you're on the set and then Dustin wants a scene to make it work, and your relationship with him evolves into something, and that's. You can see that in your work.
Well, it's also winning their trust and confidence. I mean,
Right.
that's a huge part of it. It's once they feel comfortable with you and they know that, you've got their back, which is really critical in the world of photography.
Right. When did you start working with Dustin to get that relationship?
Well, that was on Tootsie. I'd never worked with him before. I just came in as a special from Columbia Pictures. The late Ed Rodzinski was really wonderful. He and Marvin Antonowski, both long gone now, hired me on a lot of the great Columbia movies, which was, I was very fortunate.
You built that relationship so quickly that he wanted you in it within 5 weeks. That's unbelievable. That's great.
We just got along well, and the pictures look good. And
right, but still,
my retoucher was good at retouching the hairline on those wigs, so that worked.
Yeah, he was an attractive gal. Tell me about the Tom Waits situation, because that really, right? Is that the next rocket ship for you?
No, Tom was very early. Tom was late 70s. So I shot an album cover for him called Heart Attack and Vine in 1978 or 79.
Okay.
But the story that kind of ties to that is, so when they booked that shoot, I had Tom for 3 days. And we shot for 3 days. I'd picked him up. He was living at the Tropicana Hotel when it was on the corner of Santa Monica and La Cienega. And I'd pick him up at like 7:38 in the morning, in his little funky apartment there. And we'd go out and shoot all day until sometimes till midnight. And we did it for 3 days. And on the third day, the art director says, "Oh, Greg, we really," and this is again your typical art directors that are afraid of their own shadow, says to me, "Well, we'd love to get him in a tuxedo." And I said, "Well, I don't think that's going to happen." "Well, would you ask him?" I said, "Well, I'll ask Tom." So the end of the second day, I said, "Listen, Tom, they'd love to see you wear a tuxedo for a picture." And he said, "Well, the only way I'd wear a fucking tuxedo, I'd probably get shot." So we got a girl, put her on the staircase, got a gun, got fake blood, shot him in the tuxedo, greased him up, blood all over, and they spent $3,000 airbrushing all the blood out of the photograph to use it for the cover of the album. Which is kind of crazy.
Why did they not understand the blood part?
Well, this is a long time ago. We're talking 70s. And then the irony was, so he gave me like 3 days. So cut to like 20, 25 years later, maybe longer, I had a shoot with him for the London Sunday Times. I thought, well, this is great. I haven't seen Tom in a long time. Tom's a good guy. He's a brilliant artist. But he gave me 30 minutes, and I had to meet him in a Chinese diner in Santa Rosa. He lived up in Sebastopol, I think is where he lives. And
how did you pull that off?
Well, I went in. The Chinese diner was a piece of shit. There was nothing to shoot in there. Ugly, drab walls, no light. It was horrible. But right behind the Chinese diner, being in Santa Rosa, was a beautiful railroad track. So we walked out in the back, and in 5 minutes, Tom is like one of the ones like Richard Pryor, who was one of the geniuses in front of a camera, that could improvise and give you more than you could ever ask for in 5-10 minutes. That was Tom. He just was genius. And we got all the pictures on the railroad track.
Wow. Now, see, your eyes lit up when you say improvise. Do you love a subject that can just give you something special?
Well, it's interesting when they can just kind of put it on, It doesn't happen always that often.
Right. Richard Pryor was able to do that for you?
Richard Pryor was incredible.
He's a special human being.
Yeah.
They don't make him like that.
He was incredible, yeah. He was really a good guy, too, despite all the...
Right.
The people that you hear are really the big assholes generally are the ones that are actually the coolest and the nicest, the most focused, the most genuine human beings. And the ones that you hear that are so fabulous are usually the jerks. It's exactly the opposite. And people don't know that in Hollywood. They don't get it because they just see the big picture. But generally the people that are a little more discerning and aware of everything are a lot more interesting and more fun to work with.
Who's your top 5, like for someone that Richard Pryor, like spontaneous, can like out of nowhere just give you something?
People that I shot, I mean, I would say certainly at the top of the list in the day would have been Leonardo DiCaprio, because I worked with Leo a lot in his early days, and he was extraordinary. We did so many shoots when he wouldn't be working or I wasn't working. You know how long ago that was.
Right.
And we would just go and make pictures, and he loved to do pictures back in those days, and we did so many wonderful shoots. And he was someone that was comfortable with himself, that he wasn't afraid of showing maybe a little bit more of the feminine side, the more masculine side, but he enjoyed, as an artist, which is unusual for actors to do stills, because most actors don't, they suffer through doing stills,
right.
unfortunately. But Leo was really one of the greats, you know. I mean, in Bowie, of course, I worked for many years with Bowie, Bette Midler. Those are people I shot so many times, you know. Betty Davis a lot, who was also amazing.
Betty Davis?
Yeah.
She was fun to work with?
Yeah. Well, she was great with me because she was funny. She was very outspoken, you know.
Yeah.
But
she had a mouth on her, sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't even that, but she was funny. I mean, I had so many great Betty Davis stories. We did a shoot one time at the, it's now, I think it's called the Tower Hotel down there. It used to be the Argyle, I think. And I was doing a shoot for Life magazine with her and James Woods, and they loved the pictures on the staircase they had there, and the hotel asked if they could have one of the pictures, and they were going to put it on this wall where there was a picture of Mary Pickford. That's where they wanted to put the picture, and they said, okay. And she agreed. And so cut to about a month later, I get a phone call, and it's Betty Davis, that my answering service picks up. Someone's on the phone, says it's Betty Davis. I said, well, it probably is Betty Davis. And I said, Greg, Betty Davis. She says, I had dinner at the St. James Club last night, and they moved the goddamn picture. If they don't put it back, they can't fucking have it. And she hangs up the phone. So, I mean, you know, and this was probably within a year and a half before she passed away. You know, she was
great.
an amazing person, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I would call, she'd answer the phone, you know, like real old Hollywood, you know.
Oh, God.
Whole different thing. You didn't go through this person, you didn't go through that person, you know. You call up, hello.
Yeah, no layers.
No.
It was Betty.
Yeah.
What do you want, Greg? Another shoot with me again? Those are special times. Did you...
Yeah.
I mean, do you look back at that now and you put your head on the pillow and go, fuck, I can't believe I got to go through that. That was awesome.
Well, I just feel appreciative for all the great experiences I was able to enjoy in my life. Yeah.
Right. Was there a point in those early 80s, things are starting to go for you? Are you thinking, I'm gonna hit advertising, maybe do some commercial work? There's obviously big money in that. Was that something you were thinking of?
I never really did all that. You know, I had agents. I don't know that they performed so well for me, but the majority of the work, honestly, that I got, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but the majority of the work, honestly, I got pretty directly. I was very lucky because I was doing a lot of movie work, and the calls just came directly to me. Just came to my office, and you're paying agents all these big fees.
Do you think that's because people talked and said he's great to work with?
Yeah, I think they felt that I could get the picture. I think the big part when you're working on a motion picture campaign, where they bring you in as a special, like it was kind of a joke, 5 weeks. I did 6 weeks on Scarface with Al Pacino too. They want a photographer that's going to be able to get in there, get the talent to perform, because the talent doesn't really have to perform on a movie set. You know, they're there to make a film.
Right.
They're not there to take still pictures. And it's something that I think a lot of the talent, not all of the talent, they don't realize that sometimes. They think that that's, you know, a burden for them. But, you know, that's what it takes to sell a movie. They need to have some imagery. And sometimes you can get it from the movie stills, but sometimes you can't.
Right. I mean, that's the interesting part is, walk me through what's 6 weeks like on Scarface. What's your idea going in week one, and then when you're getting out in week 6? What's your...
Yeah, you know, it wasn't 6 weeks every day. It was over the course of 6 or 8 weeks of their shooting.
Right.
Tootsie, I was on every day because I was in New York while they were doing it. But on Scarface, they would pick key shooting days. Like I would shoot with Al and Michelle Pfeiffer when they were in one of the big mansions that were supposed to be in Italy, up in Santa Barbara.
Okay.
And then we'd sometimes shoot on the soundstage at Universal, and then, you know, different locations. So, you know, they would pick days when there were big money scenes where they built, you know, the elevator going up in that house where they had, you know, money on the screen, right, so that we would get, you know, great pictures. And also days where Al they weren't killing him too much in terms of what he had to do, so that there would be time where he wasn't too messed up, that we could do portraiture and pictures in between.
Where did those photos live? Where did they go?
They're all over the damn world now, man. They've made in one sale more money than I got for all my time on tour. It's unbelievable. You go out, you see posters of that everywhere. It's like I've never seen anything more exploited than the pictures from that. Of all the movies I worked on, that is the one where I would say you see the pictures, because that movie was such a big hit.
Right. You'll see a kid walking down with Al's
everything.
face.
And all those pictures from Scarface are mine. 90% of what you see out there are my pictures. If you see stuff from Scarface, it's kind of crazy.
So does that go back to the production house? And then
I never seen every. They give you a buy. You get paid a day rate and then a buyout for the.
And then off it goes. My God. Yeah. I mean, when was the first time you saw some of your work either in a window or on a shirt?
Well, I mean, I saw Tootsie as a billboard, early on, Big Chill.
And did you go like, holy?
Not really. I mean, I think probably the first one I saw the billboard for the Simple album for Leon and Mary Russell album, and it was like, wow, there's a billboard on Sunset Boulevard, yeah. But I mean, it never made me that crazy.
Did you ever do album covers? Because they were a big...
Oh, I shot hundreds of album covers.
See, that's a loss.
Hundreds of album covers.
I used to love to go through and flip through albums and see.
For one summer, I did every country act there was. I'd go down to Nashville and shoot, but... Excuse me. I did with Bowie probably a half a dozen album covers for David. I did Michael Jackson. I did Bette Midler, Barbra Streisand, Kenny Loggins. I can't remember all of them. I mean, a million musical artists, a lot. Zappa, Iggy, Brian Ferry. I did a million album covers.
That's awesome. Those were like such special moments to actually go through, open them up, especially if it was a double fold, or go back and you see Van Halen or Led Zeppelin.
I did a lot of Van Halen.
Did you?
Yeah.
How were they?
Great. The rock bands that everybody thinks, oh my God, they're going to be, hardcore drinkers and partiers, they're going to be difficult. No, I mean, I did Rat. I worked a bunch of times with Tommy Lee. I worked a lot with Van Halen. They were always very nice. I did a lot of stuff just with David Lee Roth. They were great.
Oh, David's great.
I never had any real album issues. I had a few, and we're not going to talk about it, but I mean, I had very few in my career. I was very lucky, but I had a few stars that came through that, didn't exactly wet my whistle, so to speak. But they're, those kind of people really aren't even worth giving airtime
right.
to.
But what about the ones that did? Like, you were a little surprised, like, oh my God, I can't believe.
Some of the ones that I was like, there were talent that I wasn't, that I was surprised about, that I had formulated opinions in my mind
Sure.
of what they were going to be like, and they weren't like that. And then there were other ones that I'd heard stories about that were. But one of the earliest things, and one of the things I say in my lectures, because I teach and lecture a lot, is that don't try to lock in an opinion about somebody before you shoot them, because you don't know if they got laid the night before, you don't know if their dog got run over by a car, you don't know what's going on in their life at that moment. And just like in any business, everybody's entitled to a bad day, and they happen.
Sure.
But I always tried to meet everybody halfway and tried to make it easy for them. But at the same time, when you're an artist and you're trying to create work, you need some sense of and some sort of cooperation to get the job done.
Right. Now, your approach when you're doing a portrait is very much a unique style of being right there in front of them and then working your way back. Right. Where did that come from?
Well, I mean, it's logical if you think about it, because basically if you're going to photograph someone, the most important thing is to establish some form of intimacy and understanding and trust, and you can't get that if I'm standing across the room. It's by proximity. I mean, if I'm on top of you like this, where we're close, we're going to have a much better time to communicate and to connect. And if I get back further, it's more distant, and I can't really see your features, and I can't really tell what's going to necessarily look best with the lighting and all. But if I'm up close and up front and personal, I can kind of figure out which angles I like and whatnot, and also just start to build a relationship, because I can look in your eyes, and that's something I can't do if I'm sitting across the room.
Are you a big communicator during the portrait?
Yeah. I'm a big communicator in terms of getting what I want, and once I get the person, basically body language, which is a huge part of the picture, and lighting and everything kind of where I want it, and I start to see the person either relax or unfold, or I start to get the picture, I'll encourage them, and then I back off, because I don't want to sit there and fill every waking moment and every little void of airspace with another direction, because then they're going to get locked up and they're going to get confused. So it's nice in most cases to kind of let them play out. If you can get them started on the road, then let them kind of unravel and capture what you can get from that point of view, rather than give them too much direction.
Right. Now, we've said You have a little bit of a control freak streak in you, and that's fine. But you're a huge collaborator. You love to collaborate with your subjects.
Oh, no, I mean, I collaborate. I'm not a control freak in that respect. I'm a control freak in just making sure that when I know what I want to shoot, that I have everything lined up properly.
Okay.
And then I let everything else kind of just like, and I'm also
You're a big prepper.
a firm believer when I start shooting that sometimes if I have an idea to do something, and if I find in a matter of a certain amount of time it's not working, then we move on to the next or try something else. I won't milk it to death.
When do you get that sense when things aren't working that you need to kind of move off of maybe this look?
Well, either I'm not seeing what I want in the lens, or I sense that there's a sense of uncomfortableness with the talent. If the person doesn't seem comfortable, you're not going to get a good picture because, you know, it's like taking your clothes off in front of a camera when you're doing a portrait. The person, you know, the person is kind of like aware of everything that's going on.
Sure. They obviously, yeah.
I mean, I had this situation with some of my most famous pictures of Keanu Reeves. We were in a loft downtown. I was shooting a cover for Detour magazine back in the, I think it could have been the 90s or late 90s, I think, 90s sometime, mid-90s probably. And we were shooting in a loft downtown. I'd rented this big loft to shoot in. I'd be at the motorhome and everything down there, the clothes and the makeup and the hair. And I was just watching Keanu, and he just didn't seem comfortable in front of the camera. And not really in front of the camera. I was just watching his body language and intonations as we were kind of walking around. And I said, I'm sensing that you don't feel that comfortable. I said, is there something you'd rather be doing? He said, well, honestly, I'd rather be riding my motorcycle out in Malibu. I said, well, let's pack up all this shit and let's go out to Malibu. And that's what we did. And we shot all those pictures. And, you know, some of them he was, you know, partially naked. And I put the camera down as he was changing clothes. And Keanu said, no, you shoot it. And I shot him, and we got some great pictures. And they weren't like, you know, distasteful pictures by any stretch of the imagination. But they were revealing a little bit. And so I knew that if I showed him to his publicist that they'd have been killed. So I just called Keanu. I said, can you come over and just take a look at these pictures? I want you to see them because I think they're pretty great. And he came over. He said, I love them. Use them. Run them.
I know exactly which ones you're talking about. Yeah.
And I was standing by his motorcycle just changing clothes on the highway in Malibu. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bit of pubic hair.
That's about it.
That would have never, ever happened today. Oh, my God. They would have burned your camera to the stake. Yeah. No way. But it's such a beautiful moment. You feel like you're going to go surfing with him and you guys are going to cross PCH and hit the water. Like that's what that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a casual picture. So
right. It's so well done. That relationship you can capture and create with somebody. Not everybody has that. Did you always feel natural in making that connection?
Well, I mean, this was just a situation. I dropped my camera down when I saw he was, you know, I mean, many times you're standing there and the talent changes their clothes and you're in the room. So you don't really think much about it. And, you're respectful. Usually you turn around, which I think I even turned around. And he kind of said, no, you can shoot it.
Did cinema or TV or anybody come calling at the height of your powers and say, hey, we'd love you to shoot a music video or
I
a TV ad?
a few videos. I did a few videos.
A couple, but I mean, you didn't
not much. No, I never really did a lot with film, and that was my major. It's really weird. I just never got into it. Don't ask me why, but I just didn't. I mean, I really love I just like the serenity of doing the stills in my studio and, you know, less chaos and
just the
more
comfort.
One-on-one relationship with people, yeah. And, you know, then I got into doing my nudes and stuff, and so that was a whole period. And
so where did that start?
That was a fun story. I was actually in New York in the early 80s when my career was just kind of getting going pretty well, and I went to visit a good friend of mine, Antonio Lopez, and who was a very famous fashion illustrator. Mm-hmm. And I was excited to tell him what I'd been working on and been doing, and he said, you know, so what have you been doing, Greg? And I said, well, I just shot Tootsie, Big Chill, Scarface. And I thought, well, he's going to be impressed. He goes, well, he looks me coldly in the eyes, and he said, well, that's great, but what are you doing for yourself? And I realized at a certain point I was like a hired gun. You know, I was creating imagery for other people, but not creating so much imagery for myself. And he said to me at that point, he said, you know, if you want to have longevity in this business, you need to find a creative outlet outside of your commercial work to keep your batteries charged. And I said, hey, you're right. And that's what gave me the idea of coming back, when I came back to Los Angeles, of keeping the dynamic range of my lighting style, of my strong highlights and harsh shadows, but get people to shed people of their clothes, pull the camera back, and start doing my figure studies. And that's when I started doing my more personal work, and but still maintaining my lighting style. And then Antonio's was really responsible for that.
Wow. That's interesting that he sparks that for you, that he gets you
Well,
going.
he lit the candle and made me think, yeah, you're right. I better find something to do besides just actor headshots.
Yeah, work.
Yeah.
Was there any kind of pushback? Like, oh, you're doing nudes. Why are you doing that?
No,
Or-
I mean, I probably got more pushback. And at that point in my career, I really didn't give a shit. I did a book on a boyfriend of mine, a book called Just Between Us, or as my assistant said, Not Anymore. And it was a pretty wild book. I will say it was a pretty racy book, but I wanted to do it. And at that point in my career, and it was all shot with a point and shoot cameras. The last fresh work, I should say, that was new work that was shot with on film. And that was probably mid to late 90s. And that work, was, that was pretty controversial work. But I thought, if people can't accept, the alter side of your commercial work, then that's, I mean, I've always been open about my sexuality, and I've never been particularly concerned about what people think. I mean, this city's a city based upon opinions and what people think. And I mean, the hypocrisy of the Hollywood gay mafia, so to speak, is so ridiculous in this city. And, they all know the kids they've slept with, and yet, then those kids can't even get a job because the hierarchy are more uptight and weird
Right.
about all that stuff. So, it's just, I never played into that game and never was part of that whole picture. So it never really affected me or my career, so to speak.
Well, you've always had a very interesting group that you've been with and photographed. It's always been great, like the Divine stuff and hanging out with John. I did a shoot with him, and all I mentioned was you, and then that's all we ended up talking about. I was doing for Beaker, I think it was, his movie, and I was doing up in Hollywood here.
With
shooting.
John Waters?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was, oh yeah, and Greg and this and that.
He's
and
one of my very best friends.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
very, very closest friends. And it's funny because when I did the book, It's Not About Me, David Fay, my gallerist, he'd wanted me to do a book called The Outsiders because the majority of my closest friends, like Divine, like Grace Jones, who I spend
Love
a
her.
lot of time with. Grace is here often and stays with me, and we hang out. I've always, like I said, liked the outsider people more than, the mainstream, because they're more interesting, they're more down to earth, they're more real, they're more tangible people.
right. Grace and Bridget, you shot her as well.
Yeah, I just ran into her the other day. I hadn't seen her in years. We've
How's
just
she doing?
reconnected. She looked like $1 million, rail thin, 10 feet tall, and just breathtakingly gorgeous. She looks so great. Matter of fact, we've been flirting on Instagram, and we've been trying to get together for dinner
She's stunning.
soon. She's lovely. We worked together for many, many years. She was the very second set of nudes I ever took. Tony Ward was the first famous nudes that I shot with Tony back in the day, and Bridget saw the nudes of Tony one day when we were shooting here, and we were both leaving town the next day for Europe, I believe. We both had separate trips, and we canceled and stayed and shot because I really wanted to do the nudes.
Oh,
And we stayed in town and shot. I think she was going out. I don't know if she was going out with Stallone or Tony Scott then, but we shot. We did those amazing nudes, and she was so good.
Oh.
She looks that good now. She looks absolutely. I want to shoot her. I'm going to shoot her again soon. You should look up some current pictures of her. She looks fantastic. She looks absolutely beautiful.
let me know. I'll stay on the sideline and clap.
She looks gorgeous now. She looks incredible.
Yeah, your stuff of her
I think
body.
she's like right at about 60 years of age, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I think she's pretty close, and she looks unbelievable.
The-
It was bizarre because I was flying to Munich for a gig just a couple months ago. I think it's August, September. I had to go to Munich to do something, and I was in the lounge at the airlines, and I see this tall blonde walk around. I go, God, she looks just like Bridget Nielsen. The last time I'd seen her, she was a little bit hefty and had done that TV series or something. I hadn't seen her for a while. And I thought, no, it can't be her, because I've made the mistake to go up to somebody not long ago that I thought was somebody in line. I hugged this girl and kissed her, and it was not the girl. And she was totally cool, but I thought, I'm not going to put my foot in my mouth again and go up to this woman and say, are you Bridget Nielsen? And so I was sitting there having a coffee in the, where I was in the airport, and she'd gone off. I didn't remember where she went. And this guy comes up to me and says, are you Greg Gorman? And I said, yes. He said, well, Bridget Nielsen. I said, oh, my God, I can't believe it. So then I went and sat with her till our flights we were on separate flights. But no, we were actually on the same plane, as a matter of fact.
What?
Yeah, we were. Yeah, she was in the back part of first class, and I was in the front part. We were just, in the same thing.
Yeah.
We didn't sit together, but we hung out during the flight a little bit. We were both asleep, and it was one of those long flights. But that was so funny, and so we got a good catch up. So
I mean, when you got to photograph her, I mean, she was so unique. She's so long and tall
yeah,
and beautiful.
just a great body. Yeah,
Yeah.
she was, Amazon woman. Yeah,
Yeah, and she didn't look like any other woman.
and she still doesn't.
No.
She has really short. You can Google it. She has really short blonde hair now. She looks fantastic. She looks gorgeous. She just did a huge spread, I think, for Vogue.
Really?
Big one, yeah, one of the Vogues.
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, when you got her in front of her, I'm sure you did lots of women at the time to photograph. All of a sudden, she's a foot taller. I mean, she makes, Meryl Streep or anybody else look so small. Then you get her. Do you get excited? Like, oh my God,
She was great to shoot, and I knew I was getting great pictures. Same with Tony Ward. I mean, I knew, you get people that can move in front of the camera. It makes all the difference in the world. You're going to have a beauty there, and if they're like a block of ice and you can't get it, but, she was terrific in front of the camera. Amazing. We got so much great stuff.
Stunning. Was there ever a point, was the art director, creative director saying, you'd get more work if you change up your style, if you don't do
I had that with an agent. I fired the agent. I had an agent early on in my career who was a good agent, and I liked her very much. And we won't names don't matter. But after a while, she said to me, she says, Greg, you need to reinvent yourself. You need to kind of find a new path, and I think that we can move forward more quickly if we do that. And I said, I've spent the last 40 fucking years trying to figure out who Greg Gorman is and set up a kind of lighting and a style. Why would I want to change my style at this point?
Exactly.
I said, I'm not looking to be hip, trendy, or the flavor of the month. I pride myself in having built, and I think if you look at most artists that you're familiar with, in their life, you recognize them by their style, not by the fact that they mix it up every month.
Right. Can you imagine all of a sudden Avedon at some point in the 80s decided, well, I'm doing this. I'm cross-processing all my work. I'm shooting with a fist.
That's kind of where it is.
Yeah. Oh, my God. No, you've created this beautiful body of work. Why would you want to shift all of a sudden and become some Instagram filter? That would be the worst thing to do.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. When you had subjects on set and you're doing long sets, like you said, you were doing 2 or 3 days with people, how are you keeping your organization of what you wanted to do lined up? If you wanted like David in a denim suit, David with a guitar, David with like...
No, we had everything planned out. I mean, when David and I would shoot, what David would do when we would have our 3-day shoots is David enjoyed shooting and was incredible in front of the camera. He was truly one of the giants of all of them. But at the same time, he also knew that he had to accomplish images that would fit within the parameters of certain magazines. I mean, we would do Interview, but then we would do People magazine, or we would do some crazy Boy Scout magazine that required pictures. Well, he didn't want to have to do a separate shoot for these magazines. So we would shoot stuff that we knew would fit the guidelines of those publications and stuff. And then his company, which at the time I think was called Isolar Entertainment, would hold back the art for when, the specific project that we were working on. And generally we would come together whenever we'd have to shoot an album cover, and then we would build everything else around that.
Okay. Oh, okay. You mentioned the album cover. You got to tell me. You got to give me the inside scoop. I remember this was a battle in the dorm rooms of college. The bead of sweat on his cheek.
Well, that was in New York. That was when we were shooting.
Right.
That was on that time when I was with on Tootsie, because that's when he had that platinum blonde hair.
When you saw it, did you want the bead of sweat?
Yeah, I liked it, so we shot it.
Because I remember some people were like, "It's a tear, it's a this, it's a that."
No, we just recreated it for some ad thing I just did in London recently with another guy, kind of a Bowie lookalike.
I mean,
yeah.
Were you shooting hot lights, and that's why he was getting?
No, strobe.
He just got a little sweaty, and it worked. It's such a great detail.
Yeah.
It's almost like someone came in with a little teardrop, put that in, and said, "There you go."
Yeah, we did that.
When you're making books, when were you thinking like, I want to do a book? Damn it, Greg needs to do a book. When were you deciding?
Never really thought about it. It just kind of happened very cathartically. Volume 1 is like I thought, well, I have a lot of pictures here. I've done all this interview work, and that was a lot of the interview work in the early book. And then then after the first book, then it became kind of a natural thing, and it wasn't like I had a schedule or anything. It's just like okay, that's when I gave myself the thing. I started shooting a lot of nudes, male and female nudes. Whenever I wasn't booked, I just started booking nudes and through the agencies, and then compiled a lot of work and did it. And then, and that just continued whenever I'd shoot personal work. But then I did, the LAI Works book for that campaign. And that campaign, I've been doing for more than 40 years. And we're still shooting. We're setting up shoots now. We just did Danny Trejo, and we just did a great shoot with... the great, what the heck is his name? How embarrassing.
Well, that's got to be
a bunch of great people. We did Cherry Vanilla recently, which was fun.
Oh.
And so, that campaign really helped put me on the map after interview. And, and what ultimately, we would shoot those pictures. And that was kind of when it was kind of my heyday. A lot of people were coming through the studios for shoots every day. And then it was me, like being the Jewish furniture salesman that my father was, convincing these people to do an LAI Works ad for nothing. I mean, the LAI Works was a small eyeglass company in Melrose, but I shot over 200. I've shot well over 200 ads for them, and everybody.
That's got to be a record. 40 years, that long of a campaign with one company.
Still going, and we would shoot these ads, and in the mid '80s, and they would appear every month in Interview magazine, which was what was great, and. That's what was really the key thing, I think, for a lot of the talent. They loved the idea of having their face in Interview magazine because that was the magazine to be in the day.
Sure.
And then it just so happened in the late 80s, 86, 87, Andy called me. Well, I knew because of Interview and whatnot, and social circles and whatnot, and asked if he could be in one of the ads. And because he had just signed a contract with... Ford models.
He wanted to
and he came out and we shot, and that picture, unbeknownst to me at the time, became my most famous photographs.
See, I like that photograph. There's so many other ones that you have taken that I go, oh my, that's the one I want.
What do you like? Which
the Bridget one. That one's gorgeous.
The frontal nude where she's standing against the wall. Yeah,
because her arms and her body, it's like it's not a real person, and she's so gorgeous and striking. There's one of Leo. He's very young in his career. It's a black and white. It's just a shoulder, but his jawline's unbelievable.
That one big headshot of his.
Yeah.
That's a famous picture.
But you've got someone looking around here. I mean, there's
None
so
of these
many.
Are mine.
No, but this great work. I mean,
Great work. Yeah, Lenny Riefenstahl and the voice shot and this was great of Horace Bristol. This is such a famous picture.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, one of my favorite trumpet players of all time. When you're the pandemic hits, everybody's going to go like, oh my God, what do we do? You decide to take pictures.
I had new cameras and new lights from my sponsors, which was, I had brand new lights from Rhodolite, which I've been using for,
Everybody's binge watching, Greg, and you're deciding to take pictures. That's fantastic.
I had the lights, and I had brand new cameras I was shooting with, which were the Fuji cameras. And I thought I don't have any work to show for
I don't have anything
for my sponsors. And I thought I'd had a pretty good collection of African voodoo and fetish dolls, and I thought, and masks. You haven't seen the masks.
How many are we talking here?
Well, I shot a couple of hundred, but I ended up buying collections. I didn't have that many when we started the project, but I started shooting them in my kind of style, my photographic style. Not black and white, obviously color. Obviously digital's color anyway, but most of them are pretty monochromatic. I started photographing them and realized that I had these pictures that were kind of cool. Now, it was quite a complicated process because, as you can see, they're very small. Most of them are like 4 to 6 inches in height. And so I would have to shoot 20 captures because I had to shoot macro photography and then combine them with photo aligning and blending them in a focus stack to get the depth of field from the front to the back of the sculptures. And then I thought these need a little bit more. And Gary Johns has been my creative director on half of my books. I've published 13 books, and he's been the creative director on a lot of them. I thought maybe he should take a look, take my pictures, throw them in the middle of his art and see what happens. And he thought I was crazy, but he tried it. And when I saw the results from the first couple, I went, oh my God, these are unbelievable. And that's how the project started. And that brought in my retoucher, Rick Allen. And that's how the project got off the ground. And every afternoon, Jerry, who's my assistant, I think who you met when you came in, we would spend every afternoon, we just set aside from 4 to 6. And it usually ended up going sometimes from like 3 to 7 or whatever. We would just shoot 3 or 4 pictures because that's all you could get
Just
done in
here
a day.
in your studio.
Yeah, I basically put a bowl of rice on a Lazy Susan so you could stand them in there. And then photograph them from different angles, turning them into the light, away from the light, just like I did my portraits. Worked with reflectors, silks, blacks to take light away.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how that project was born.
Was that fun for you?
Oh, it was amazing. And I always joked, and I always said many times in many of my interviews that I'd never shoot anything that couldn't talk back to me. But, you know, a lot of these were voodoo dolls, and they did talk back to us. We had a handful that we couldn't get, that I had to shoot 3 or 4 times before I could get the portrait. And this is with me trying all my magic, and I just couldn't get it. And then sometimes we eventually, I think eventually we got pictures that we could live with.
Did it kind of feel revigorating, like getting in the studio?
Well, it was completely revigorating. I mean, to have a project that wasn't me shooting, so to speak, pardon my French, dick or pussy or celebrities, all of which tie together anyway, was kind of fun. And it really was an amazing project. Amazing, you know.
That is...
You know, and it's exciting. And we're going to have our first very big show, you know, in a couple of weeks now down in Palm Springs, which anyone's invited to come if they're down in Palm Desert. It's the Homan Gallery. Home and Fine Art Gallery on Valley Court.
27th.
On the 27th from 5 to 7. Yeah.
Right.
Stop by and say hi.
This is what we got into photography to do, is to do projects that fire us, get us fired up.
Yeah. Well, this was a great one. I mean, you know, I only have had a couple that were kind of out of the ordinary for me. This one, I did a book a while back called Outside the Studio, which is a book of pictures I shot in Southeast Asia. And that was my only venue back into street photography. You've never seen that book?
No, I have, and it's unbelievable.
You know,
You're
and I never got a
kickboxing
show with it. Faye didn't want to do a show. He felt that, you know, he always said that, you know, Herb's pictures from Africa, that was not his signature, and they didn't think that the pictures in Southeast Asia was my signature. But I think it's a pretty good book, and I like the pictures. It was tough for me, I'll tell you. You know,
you worked your ass off, didn't you?
I'm just used to being in a very controlled situation, and when you put me on the street and with a camera in front of people I don't know, it was tough to maintain my style, you know. But I ended up doing a big project.
The blind man photo.
Yeah.
I love the blind man photo.
But we ended up doing, Steve McCurry got me involved in this project called 9 Days in the Kingdom. So I ended up going over and shooting Muay Thai kickboxing, which was cool, which is a big part of the book.
Yeah, I mean, what was that for you to shoot an action sport?
Well, it was funny because I said I'm used to shooting still life. I tell people to sit down and fucking hold still, you know, whether it's the dolls or a movie star. You know, it's a kind of a funny situation. So it was very challenging, but it was great. But it was like me taking a workshop. You know, I had to come up to the table and figure it out. You know, the right shutter speeds, so that you'd get a little bit of movement, but not too much that the picture was blurred, but you still got the power of the hit and the punch, and it was pretty extraordinary.
The images looked like they were, I mean, really tough lighting. You really probably...
Yeah, well, we were shooting pretty high ISOs, and, you know, but I've always shot high ISOs digitally speaking, not if I'm doing the big commercial work, but personal work. I have no problem shooting at 3200, you know. I mean,
the stuff looks great compared to what we started out with.
Like, I mean, you know, it has, that, in that book, most of the stuff wasn't that high because there were earlier cameras. That was a while ago, 2010. So I was probably shooting most of that stuff at 1600, and that still had some noise in it, but it looked like grain and film.
Now, is that approach different? Were you thinking like, okay, I got to get a 51.2 or, I mean, what?
No, I've never had super fast lenses. It's funny. I never shoot that much wide open. I usually shoot longer lenses, so consequently...
7200, 2.8?
Yeah, the shallow, the 7200 4.
Okay.
But I just got the new 2.8 for my Sony now. I've switched over from Canon to Sony, so...
How do you like that?
I love Sony. I love Sony and Fuji. That's what I shoot those two. Fuji more for the medium format, and the Sony for 35 I love.
Yeah. Boy, you know, from when we started, cameras have come in a way I could never have imagined. You do this book, you got a project, but how long have you been doing workshops?
I actually started teaching back probably either the late 80s or very early 90s for Reed Callanan in Santa Fe, New Mexico is when I first started. He asked me to do a workshop, and I go, what's a workshop? Who the hell knew back then? And it just became something that I really had a passion for, and I felt I was a pretty good teacher. And I've done, when I built my home in Northern California in Mendocino, I thought, why not do workshops out of here? Because we had black sand beaches, we had 40-foot sand dunes, we had vineyards, we had the ocean. I was on a big cliff. So I did about 50 workshops up there, but I teach internationally all over the world, and it's fun for me. It's like, it's selfish in some ways. I get to go rent these beautiful castles in Austria and France and in Germany and in Italy, and then teach workshops, in Provence and, in Monza, near Monza in Italy, and in Italy, in Austria, and outside of Graz, Austria, in the Steiermark region, wine region. It's just fabulous. Now I'm doing these workshops up in the Dolomites, which I started last year with one of my gallerists in Munich, and it's incredible. We have these exquisite locations and great models. And
are you very hands-on, or
I'm on top of everybody when I'm teaching. I don't send them off to shoot ever by themselves. I'm always with them every day. So it's a very hands-on workshop. Yeah, and they're small. They're like 9 students.
That's intimate. Yeah, that's perfect.
So they learn a lot, and we shoot 5 days, and I do demos every day, and then they shoot, in small groups of 3 people, and with a model, and we have different models, and do portraiture and nude. So, I think for me, I kind of lost my passion for the commercial work around 2005, 2006, as I was telling you earlier. And I knew that if I wanted to keep my passion for photography alive, I needed a different outlet, a new outlet. And that was really when I decided to get into education. So I've been teaching for 35 years or so.
Are you critiquing their work on site?
Every day I critique on site. We look at the pictures. We put them up on the screen. They'll give me, 10 to 12 pics every day.
That is
and
priceless.
We go over their pictures one-on-one with everybody. So everybody sees everybody else's pictures. And because they're working, let's say, in teams of 3, one person shooting and 2 assisting, holding reflectors or a light or whatever, flag, they see the mistakes they made as an assistant. So it's really a pretty hands-on thing, and then it's also because of me a lot about food and wine. So we have really, we're shooting up in the Dolomites. You've got, the influence of Italian, Austrian, and German food in one location. So it's pretty amazing.
If you weren't a photographer, would you have been a chef? I've heard about these grand meals and parties.
I'm a decent cook. I wouldn't say I'm a great chef. Could have been. I became a winemaker. I made wine for a long time. So that wine making was a great passion and was really fun. I did that for quite. I made wine from 2006 to 2018 up in Napa.
That's unbelievable.
Which was cool and fun.
Yeah. If you weren't a photographer, what would you have been? What would have Greg Gorman have been?
I don't know. A professional fisherman.
You do love fishing.
Oh yeah, that's my big passion. I love fishing. Yeah.
What do you like to fish?
Where or what?
Where and what?
Well, I think it just has a lot to do with my upbringing in Kansas. As a little boy, I always liked the outdoors, and so I like just being outdoors. The fishing is kind of an added bonus, but I do love to fish, and it takes me to really beautiful places. I fish in Wyoming. I do trout fishing with my good friend Kent Fleury in Wyoming, usually almost every year. Now he and I are fishing more on the East Coast, where he's resettled with his wife. He's down in Palmetto Bluffs, South Carolina. So we fished down near Beaufort, actually where I worked on the Big Chill for umpteen weeks. And we fished there for redfish, which is a lot of fun. And then in Maine, where I teach, I stay on a lake, so I do a lot of smallmouth bass fishing in the morning. And then on the weekends when I'm not teaching, I go out for stripers. So
I want to come back as Greg Gorman.
But the teaching is a nice liaison into food, wine, fishing.
Man.
It's like the old days when you'd work on a movie, and if you're in a nice location, you'd try to add a day or 2 on here at somebody else's expense and enjoy doing things on your own. Like this next trip to Europe, I'll go and see. One, I'm getting ready to have a big exhibition in outside Dubai coming up in February at Exposure. And when I finish that trip, I'm going to go to Egypt and see Egypt. I've never been to Egypt, so trying to pack in a few more before I start pushing up daisies. So.
Good. Are you do you like fly fishing?
No, I'm sad. Most of my friends love to fly fish, but I'm an old school spin fisherman.
Okay.
Yeah, I like open face spinning reel, little ultralight.
I think maybe a workshop in Miami or maybe Wyoming or Montana.
Yeah, something like that could be great. You're not far, but what I am now, I'm staying in a cabin on a lake in Maine. It's not exactly chopped liver.
That's not bad at all. Let's end it with this. What advice would you give young photographers getting into the business, your early 20s? What do you say to them?
Find another job today. No, in all honesty, try to find your own voice. It's like find a style that look at the work that you're doing now and see what you feel is repetitive that you're coming back to over and over again to kind of figure out your own style, your own voice. Never think you've taken the perfect picture, you know. I think it's much harder today. I wouldn't want to start over today. Everybody's got Photoshop, and everybody's got an autofocus, auto exposure camera. They all have their little handy cell phones, and they take a picture, and they think they're the greatest thing since Richard Avedon. And honestly, they'd be hard-pressed to repeat a picture that they may have gotten lucky to have gotten on their phone. I mean, I get many pictures on my phone and go, wow, that is so great. I could never light something like that. And the phone captures it pretty well.
Right.
But, you know, I think it's hard today. I think today's a tough time to go out and become a photographer.
Right. Mr. Gorman, I can't thank you enough. I love your work. I stole from your work. You inspired my work. I mean, you are one of the guys of Mount Rushmore. And you are the reason I am a photographer.
Right, you're very kind.
And I'm serious. When I saw your work, and God, like I said early, when it was only seeing it on a magazine, or, you know, I used to bug my librarian at the La Habra Library. I would always tell, we need more photo books. What magazines can you get for
you're
me?
Very kind. I'm going to go make you a little print of Bridget Nielsen before you leave.
No, but I'm serious. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for what you've done, your work. You're still teaching. Like, if anybody takes your workshops, and those 5 days, they pick up one thing from you, it was worth every penny. You're a master, sir. Thank you.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Greg Gorman. You can find information about his website. You can find information about his workshop at his website, gormanphotography.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please click the like button and become a subscriber to the podcast. Remember to follow the Just a Good Conversation podcast on Instagram, and you can find all of our past shows on our website at justagoodconversation.com. Thank you for listening.